Wyoming Territory, August 1877. The sun was barely up when Osiah Sutton heard the sharp pounding of hooves on the dry earth outside his ranch house. His hand went straight to the rifle leaning against the doorframe. No one rode up this far into the hills unless they were lost or running from something. He stepped out onto the porch, bare-chested and dusty from mending a fence all night. Two figures on horseback came into view, both women, both riding hard. When they reached the edge of the corral, one of the horses stumbled. The younger woman tumbled off, hit the dirt hard, and did not move. "Help!" the older woman shouted as she jumped down, dark skirts flying. "Please," she hit her head. Osiah was already moving. He reached the girl on the ground first. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Her forehead was scraped open, bleeding down into her hair. "I need water and a cloth," he said quickly, glancing up. The woman's hands trembled. I will get it." She ran for the pump beside the house. Osiah lifted the girl gently in his arms. She was light as a sack of feed, and her face looked too pale under the blood. He carried her inside and laid her down on the narrow cot in the corner. When the older woman returned with the water, he finally looked at her fully. She was young, maybe 22, 23. Dust covered her dress and neck, her boots were scuffed, and her hair, a mess of dark curls, had come loose from the pins. But her eyes, those wide, tired eyes, were clear and sharp. "I am Osiah Sutton. This is my place." "Vela," she said, voice rough. "Vela Foster. That's my sister, Bethany. Please thank you for helping us." He nodded once. "You two running from something?" She hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. "All right," he said. "You are safe here. For now." Vela's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away fast. "We will not stay long. Just until Bethany wakes." Osiah rinsed the cloth and wiped the blood from the girl's forehead. "You will stay as long as needed." Hours passed. Bethany stirred, moaned, then fell asleep again. Osiah made coffee and fixed a plate of beans and bread. Vela sat at his table, quiet, picking at her food. "Where are your folks?" he asked gently. "Dead," she said. "Been 3 years now. We were living with our uncle in Laramie." "But she stopped, jaw tight. "He is not a kind man." Osiah nodded once. "I do not need more than that." Vela looked at him then. Really looked. "You live here alone?" "I do. My father left me this place. Been scraping by since the war ended." He looked through the window at the dried-up creek bed. "Barely. I am one bad season from losing it." She followed his gaze. "You grow crops." "Used to. Drought took the last of them. I raise cattle now. But even the water's getting scarce." Vela lowered her eyes. "I can cook." "So, I am good with horses too. If you let us stay, I can help." He studied her. "You do not owe me anything." "I know. But I still want to help." Bethany woke the next morning, dazed but alert. She remembered the ride, the fall, and her sister's hand in hers. Osiah gave her a soft smile and a bowl of broth. "You are safe," he told her. By the end of the week, Vela had taken to cooking breakfast and brushing down the horses. She moved through the house like she had always belonged there, and yet she never assumed too much. She asked before doing anything. She always waited until Osiah spoke first. One evening, Osiah found her outside by the fence, watching the sun drop behind the hills. He stood beside her, arms folded. "You thinking of leaving?" he asked. "I do not know," she said. "We have nowhere to go. But I do not want to be a burden." "You are not." She turned to him. "Osiah, why are you helping us?" He did not answer right away. The wind picked up, rustling the dry grass around them. "Because someone once helped me. After the war. I was broke, starving. A widow gave me shelter and food for a week. She never asked for anything in return. I have not forgotten." Vela looked at him and something softened in her face. "You are a good man." He met her eyes. "You are a strong woman." That night, after Bethany fell asleep, Osiah and Vela sat by the fire. She wrapped her arms around her knees and he handed her a mug of coffee. "I was a clerk before," she said softly. "In a lawyer's office. I handled ledgers, legal filings, land deeds. My uncle made me quit when he took us in." Osiah's brow lifted. You know land records? Yes. Why? He stood and pulled the box from the shelf. Inside were yellowed papers, brittle with age. These are my father's. I never understood them fully. He said our claim was solid, but after he passed, the bank started circling. Vela leaned over the documents, already scanning the words. This land grant, this is older than the state charter. Did you know that? I did not. She looked up at him, her face alight. Osiah, this may be why they are trying to push you off. This land is worth more than you know. He stared at her. You think you can prove it? I know I can. That night, he could not sleep. Not because of worry, but because of the way she had looked at him like he mattered. Like he was not just a poor cowboy trying to hold onto dirt and dust. Days passed. Bethany got stronger. Vela worked beside him, sorting records, making notes. She rode into town once to make copies of key documents. When she came back, her face was flushed, but she smiled. I saw the county clerk, she said. I filed a petition to challenge the bank's claim. We have a real shot. Osiah stared at her, stunned. You did all that? I told you I wanted to help. He stepped close enough to smell the dust and soap on her skin. You were not just helping. You were saving everything I have. Her eyes flicked to his mouth, then back to his eyes. Then let me stay. I want you too. And then he kissed her. It was not rushed. It was not wild. It was steady, warm, and real. She leaned into him, her hands on his chest. His arms wrapped around her, anchoring her like he had been waiting for this moment longer than he knew. When they pulled apart, she smiled, breathless. I think I have been falling for you since I saw you holding Bethany. I think I started the moment you looked me in the eye and did not flinch. From that moment, nothing between them was uncertain. She slept in his arms that night, and it felt right. Like peace after a storm. Like sunrise after a long, cold night. And neither of them had to run anymore. The first hard frost came earlier than expected, thin white blades clinging to fence posts and curling the edges of what little grass still grew along the ridge. Osiah rose before dawn to bring in the last of the calves from the north slope. When he returned, Vela was standing at the stove, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, sleeves damp from scrubbing out the tin pans she'd used for baking. She didn't turn when he stepped inside, but she said, if we can haul enough water from the spring before it freezes over, I can start soaking the beans this afternoon. There's still some salt pork. Osiah took off his gloves and set them on the table. You make plans as if you mean to be here come winter. I do, she said, and turned. Unless you've changed your mind. He crossed to her slowly, brushing a curl off her cheek. No, I haven't. She leaned into his touch for a moment before pulling away to hang the wet towel near the stove. Then we've got work to do. That spring's nearly a mile out. They made the first trip together in silence, both carrying empty barrels on the sled Osiah had built with his father years ago. The mule, old and steady, pulled the weight without complaint. Halfway back, Vela said, Your father, was he kind to you? Osiah kept his eyes ahead, hands tight on the reins. He was hard but fair. Taught me to keep my word even when it costs. She nodded. Mine was gentle. He used to write poems on the backs of receipts. Kept them folded in his coat. What happened to them? Lost in the fire after Mama died. I remembered a few lines, but not the whole of any. They rode the rest of the way without speaking. At the house, Bethany was sitting on the porch, mending a tear in her coat with small, careful stitches. She looked up, eyes brighter than they'd been the week before. I finished sorting the papers, she said. There's a deed transfer that looks wrong. The date doesn't match the receipt. Osiah took the sheet she offered and frowned. That'd be the year Pa went to Cheyenne. He said something about a new surveyor. Then it might not be legal, Bethany replied. If it wasn't notarized proper. Vela stepped forward, brushing snow from her sleeves. We'll need a certified copy from the territorial office. That means someone has to ride into Rawlins. That's 3 days out, Osiah said. And the roads will ice over soon. I can go, Vela offered. I know what to ask for. And I'm not afraid to press. He looked at her. You'd ride that far alone? No, she replied. You'll come with me. Bethany folded her hands in her lap. I'll keep the fire going. And I'll finish the inventory of the livestock. Osiah hesitated. There's a man in Rawlins, Jeremiah Doran. He's with the bank. If he sees you. He won't, Vela said. He's the kind who looks through women, not at them. He won't remember my face. They left the next morning at first light. The trail was narrow and crusted with frost, but the sky was clear and the wind still. Osiah rode ahead, rifle across his saddle. Vela kept pace beside him, her face hidden beneath a scarf. They made camp that night beneath a cluster of wind-warped pines. Vela gathered brush for the fire while Osiah hobbled the horses. When she returned, he was already stacking rocks to shield the flames from the wind. She handed him a wrapped bundle. Dried apples. Bethany tucked them into my coat without saying. He gave a short laugh. She's sharper than most men I've known. She had to learn fast, Vela said, sitting beside him. After our mother passed, it was just the three of us. I took work where I could. She watched the house and kept the ledgers. She's always had a mind for numbers. The fire crackled low. Osiah held out the bundle of apples and they ate in silence for a while. When the wind shifted, he said, "What will you do once this is settled? If the land's secure?" Vela looked into the fire. "Build something that lasts. A home. A place where Bethany can grow into her own. And you." "I want to plant a garden," she said quietly. "Not because it's necessary, but because I can. Because no one will tell me not to." He turned toward her. "You'll have the room here. And the soil's not bad, once it thaws." She met his eyes. "Would that be all right, Osiah? If I made a life here with you?" He reached out, slow and sure, and took her hand. "That's all I want." She pressed her forehead to his shoulder, and he held her there until the fire burned low. They reached Rawlins by the second afternoon. The town was busy with freight wagons and travelers heading west. Vela kept her head down beneath her bonnet, the collar of her coat pulled high. The territorial office sat beside the telegraph station, its windows fogged from the stove within. Vela stepped inside while Osiah waited with the horses. When she returned, she held a sealed envelope, her eyes bright with purpose. "It's enough," she said. "The deed was misfiled. This gives you standing to contest the foreclosure." Osiah took the envelope, held it in both hands, and let out a long breath. "You did it." "We did," she said, voice steady. That night, they stayed in a shed behind the livery stable, blankets pulled close, the scent of hay and horses thick in the air. Vela lay beside him, her hand tucked into his, and said, "I think my father would have liked you." Osiah smiled into the dark. "I think I would have liked him too." They rode out at dawn, the sky pale with cold light. Behind them, the town faded into the hills. Ahead, the road curved back toward home, toward the girl waiting by the fire and the land that might now be theirs to keep. Neither of them said it, but they knew something had shifted. Not just in the papers Vela carried, but in what they had begun to build between them quietly, steadily, like roots beneath thawing earth. The morning they returned, frost still clung to the porch rail. Bethany opened the door before their boots hit the steps, a wool shawl drawn tightly around her shoulders. "You're back late," she said, stepping aside. "I was starting to think you'd gotten snowed into a saloon." Vela touched her cheek as she passed, her voice light. "You know neither of us drinks." Osiah followed, tugging off his gloves. The horses needed resting on the second day. "We camped early near the bluff." Bethany looked him over, then Vela. "You both look thinner." "There wasn't much appetite," Vela murmured. "Cold takes it out of you." Bethany crossed her arms. "You'll eat now. I made a stew. I had to use the last of the potatoes, but there's still enough salt left to get us through a few more weeks." They sat together at the table, the fire snapping low in the hearth. Osiah glanced at the corner where the deed papers sat, still sealed. "Did anyone come by?" Bethany shook her head. "Only Eli from the Southern Trail. He asked if you needed help driving the cattle come spring. I said you'd ask when it was time." Osiah nodded. "Good." After supper, Vela went to the bedroom to unpack her satchel, and Bethany lingered beside the fire, mending a pair of Osiah's gloves. The silence between them stretched until Bethany spoke. "You love her." He didn't look up. "I do. She's quieter around you than she was with anyone else. That doesn't mean less. She just trusts different now." He set his cup down. "I don't plan to give her reason not to." Bethany gave a small nod, then returned to her stitching. The next morning, Vela rode into town with the envelope, this time alone. She left before first light, bundled in Osiah's spare coat, and promised to return by dusk. He watched her ride out from the gate, her braid tucked under her collar, her posture steady. By late afternoon, he had finished mending the barn's western door and was checking the fence line north of the pasture when he spotted dust rising along the far road. It wasn't Vela. The wagon was too wide, the horses too fine. When it pulled closer, Osiah recognized the man on the bench, Jeremiah Doran. Doran pulled up just outside the gate, his eyes scanning the property like it was already marked for sale. "Mr. Sutton," he called. "Thought I'd ride up. Got word from the office in Rawlins that your deed's being reviewed." Osiah stepped closer, his tone even. "It is." Doran leaned against the reins, voice oily. "You've had this place a long time. But land changes hands, especially when records go missing. Don't take it personal. Just business. It's personal when someone lies to take what isn't theirs." Doran smiled thinly. "Be careful, Sutton. I've seen men lose more than land when they start talking like that." Osiah didn't answer. He watched until the wagon turned and rattled back down the hill. Vela returned at sundown. Her cheeks were red from wind, her eyes sharp. "They didn't want to release the certified copy," she said, dismounting. "Said it needed to be approved by Doran's office. But I had the clerk read the territorial charter aloud. He knew I wasn't bluffing. He signed." She handed Osiah the folded parchment. "It's done." He took it, his hands slow and deliberate. "He came here today." Her face tightened. "Did he threaten you?" "Not in words that'd hold up. But he wanted me nervous." She looked toward the hills, then back at him. "We can fight this now, with law behind us." That night, after Bethany went to bed, Osiah stood at the window, listening to the wind scrape against the eaves. Vela came up behind him, her arms slipping around his waist. "He won't win," she said softly. "You've held this land too long to lose it to a man like that." "I've never had anyone fight beside me like this," he said, his voice low. She rested her cheek between his shoulder blades. "You do now." He turned and looked down at her, his thumb brushing the threadbare edge of her collar. "Marry me." Her breath caught. He didn't rush to fill the silence. She stepped back just enough to see his face. "You're sure?" "I've never been more." She nodded once, her eyes clear. "Then yes." They didn't kiss. Not right away. He simply rested his forehead against hers, and they stood like that, steady as stone. In the weeks that followed, snow stacked high against the barn walls, and the world quieted under its weight. Letters passed between Vela and the territorial office. Bethany began drawing up plans to expand the storage shed into a second room. On the first clear day in March, Osiah hitched the wagon and led Vela down into town. They married in the back room of the general store, with Bethany as witness and a borrowed Bible between them. No crowd. No fuss. Just hands joined, vows spoken, and a silence afterward that carried more than words ever could. That night, in the house that had once felt too empty, Osiah lay beside his wife, her breath warm against his chest. His hand rested over hers, the calluses of her fingers fitting against his own like they'd been shaped for it. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. For the first time in years, sleep came easy. And for the first time in his life, he woke knowing he'd never face another storm alone. By late April, the low hills softened under new grass, and the last of the ice slipped from the creek like a breath released. The thaw came slow but sure, and with it, the burden on Osiah's shoulders began to lift, not all at once, but in measured degrees, like frost melting from a barn roof at noonday. Bethany had begun tending a small plot near the southern fence, her fingers black with soil from morning till dusk. She planted onions, early peas, and a scattering of hollyhocks with quiet precision. Vela watched her from the porch one afternoon, chin resting on her knees, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Osiah came up behind her, wiping his hands on a rag. "She's taken to that patch like it's always been hers. She needs something to care for," Vela said. "Something that doesn't ask more than it gives." He sat beside her, boots dusty. "You think she'd want to stay?" "I think she already has." They sat in silence, the kind that didn't strain. The wind moved through the cottonwoods, stirring their leaves like thoughts not yet spoken. Vela glanced over. You ever think of what else this place could be? What do you mean? Not just a ranch. A place where folks who've got nowhere else might come. Like we did. Osiah tilted his head, studying her. You want to open the door wide. Not to everyone. Just those who need a start. He didn't answer right away, but his gaze drifted toward the barn. I'd need more hands come calving season, and the bunkhouse could take repairs. Vela touched his arm, fingers threading through the crook of his elbow. You've already lived through lean years. Might as well build something that lasts. That evening, after supper, he lit the lantern in the loft and began sorting the pile of old lumber left by his father, beams still solid, though warped at the edges. Bethany joined him without being asked and began marking measurements on a scrap of paper. You're planning something, she said plainly. I am. She didn't press. She just nodded once and handed him a nail pouch. 3 days later, a rider came up the road, dust trailing from his coat hem. He was middle-aged, with hollow cheeks and a hat pulled low. Osiah stepped out to meet him, rifle slung but not raised. Looking for work, the man said, voice gravelly. Name's Linus Keene. Heard you might be needing help with repairs. Osiah studied him. Who told you that? Woman in Rollins. Said you were fixing to make room for more than cattle. Osiah's eyes flicked to the house. Vela stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching. She tell you anything else? Said you were fair. Said you'd let a man earn his keep if he was honest. Osiah held his gaze a long time, then stepped back. You can bunk in the tack room. We start at first light. Keene nodded once and dismounted, leading his horse toward the lean-to without another word. That night, Vela leaned against the doorframe as Osiah washed up at the basin just outside. The lantern light cast long shadows across the yard. You sent word to Rollins, he said. I did. He dried his hands, then turned. You think I'm ready for this? I think you were born ready. You just didn't know it yet. He stepped closer, the last of daylight fading behind his shoulder. You ever stop surprising me? She touched his chest, right over the fabric of his shirt. I hope not. By the end of May, they had 2 more hands working the land, both older men, both quiet and deliberate in their labor. Keene took to the fence repairs like he'd done it his whole life. The other, named Roy, had a way with the cattle that even Osiah respected. Bethany, always listening more than speaking, began writing down the names of those who came looking for work or shelter. She kept a ledger of hours, supplies, and agreements, each entry written in her neat, narrow hand. One afternoon, Vela found her beneath the cottonwood near the barn, papers spread across her lap. You keeping track of every nail and board? Bethany didn't look up. We'll need it if anyone ever questions why we took in men without contracts. Vela crouched beside her, brushing away a leaf that had fallen onto the page. You're good at this. Bethany shrugged. It's numbers. They behave if you treat them right. Vela tilted her head. You ever think of writing something more than ledgers? Bethany looked at her, eyes cautious. Like what? Anything you want. The girl didn't answer, but her pencil paused on the page. That night, Osiah found Vela at the pasture fence, watching the last of the light settle over the hills. He came up beside her with 2 mugs of coffee, handing her one. We're feeding more mouths than I ever imagined, he said. Yet the larder's not empty. She took a sip, the wind lifting strands of her hair. It's not just us anymore. He nodded slowly. I was always waiting for the land to give me something. Turns out it's what we do with it that matters. She turned toward him, her voice soft. You gave us a place when we had nowhere. That's what started this. He set his mug down and took her hand. I don't say thank you enough. You don't have to. She leaned into him and he wrapped his arms around her, the scent of hay and spring dust between them. In the distance, the cattle lowed softly, and within the house, Bethany's pencil scratched over paper. The wind carried the faint sound of hammering from the shed where Keene worked by lantern light. The ranch was no longer just a patch of land waiting to be claimed. It was becoming something new, something built from more than sweat and fences. And for the first time, Osiah saw not just what had been saved but what they were all building together. By mid-June, the bunkhouse stood sound again, its new roof pitched clean and tight against the sky. The smell of sawdust still hung in the air, but already the space held warmth. A pair of rough-hewn cots, a shelf of borrowed books, coffee tins filled with nails, and a chipped enamel kettle left simmering near the stove. The men who came stayed longer now. Some worked a few weeks, helped mend fences or herd cattle, and moved on. Others lingered, drawn by the steadiness of the days under Osiah's quiet hand, the order Bethany brought to the ledgers, and the unspoken invitation that had taken root since Vela arrived. Word had passed quietly from one town to the next. If you were honest and meant to work, you could find a place at the Sutton Ranch. One morning, as the sun edged over the ridge, Vela knelt in the small herb garden she'd planted beside the porch. Her hands moved with practiced ease through the thyme and yarrow, pinching back new growth, shaking off dust. She didn't look up when Osiah stepped onto the porch behind her. "I had a letter from a woman in Hannah," she said, brushing dirt from her palm. "She's widowed. 2 children. Says her husband left nothing but debts. She heard we might take her in." Osiah leaned on the post, watching her. "We've never had children here. She isn't asking for charity. Just a start. Says she can spin and sew. Her oldest is 9. He considered that. We've got the space. And Mary's cabin is still standing down by the creek." Vela sat back on her heels. "I thought of that. It needs a new door, but the chimney's good." Then right her back. She looked up at him then, eyes bright with something deeper than pride. "I already did." Osiah gave a slow nod, then descended the porch steps and offered his hand. She let him pull her to her feet, her fingers curling around his with a quiet certainty. "Do you remember that day you first found us here?" she asked. "I remember everything about it. I thought we'd stay a week, hide out, then move on. You could've. I didn't want to," she said, voice low. "Even then." He brushed a curl from her forehead. "You stayed. You made this place more than it was." That evening, after supper, Bethany sat on the porch with her notebook balanced on her knees. The light was fading, but she didn't seem to notice. Vela joined her, settling into the chair beside her. "Are you writing again?" she asked. Bethany didn't look up. "Something new. A kind of record. Stories. True ones. About the people who've come here. What they left behind. What they've built." Vela tilted her head. "Does it help?" Bethany nodded once. "It makes things make sense. They'd be proud of you, you know. Mama and Papa." Bethany closed the notebook gently. "I know. I think I'm proud of me too." She stood and went inside without another word. Vela stayed, watching the horizon until Osiah returned from the barn. "She's starting to look ahead," she said as he sat beside her. "So are you. I think I always was. I just didn't know where I was going until I found you." He reached over, took her hand, and laced their fingers together. "We've built something true here." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "And we're not done." Later that month, the widow from Hannah arrived with her children in a broken cart drawn by a sway-backed mule. Osiah helped her down, and Vela gave her a warm cloth and something to drink before showing her the cabin. The children were quiet, thin but curious. Bethany knelt beside them and asked if they'd ever helped gather eggs. By the next morning, they were trailing her through the yard, carrying baskets and whispering secrets. The cabin was mended, the garden widened, and the bunkhouse filled. And still more came. Osiah kept working the land with steady hands. He taught the boys how to read cattle signs and patch bridles. Vela kept the books, wrote letters, and worked beside the women mending shirts and sowing seeds. Bethany took on teaching, using chalk on the side of the barn. Her students perched on logs in the dirt. One evening, as thunder rolled in the distance and the smell of rain hung heavy in the air, Vela stood barefoot in the doorway looking out at all they had gathered. Osiah came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and rested his chin on her shoulder. "There's more life here than I ever thought this land could hold," he said. She smiled. It's not just the land. It's the people. He pressed a kiss to the curve of her neck. It's you. Their life unfolded gently after that. Not without hardship, but never without purpose. Each new season brought its own rhythm. Children growing taller, fences needing repair, meals shared around the long table in the main house. The ranch became something more than a homestead. It became belonging, hard-earned and deeply rooted. Years passed, but the shape of their love never changed. It deepened, weathered, and settled into the bones of the place like the grain of the floorboards beneath their feet. They touched, often hands brushing as they passed, fingers lingering at the small of a back, a kiss pressed to a temple in passing. Nothing showy, just the steady weight of love earned daily. One crisp morning, Vela placed a new name in the ledger. A girl of 18, alone from Evanston, with calloused hands and a stubborn streak. Osiah looked over her shoulder and nodded. She'll do just fine, he said. Vela looked up at him, smile slow, eyes full of the same quiet fire that had carried her up the road all those years ago. She's come home, she said, and they both knew it was true. This wasn't just a place to survive anymore. It was a place to begin, forever.